Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Papa's Tackle Box. We're very grateful that you're joining us on whatever platform that you get your podcast needs from. Thanks to everyone who's been following us and keeping up with everything that we're doing on Facebook, Instagram, or even our website, legacycc.org. Also, a huge shout out to those who have given to the podcast through our website under the Give Now tab. Now, I know you all are waiting to hear what Papa's going to pull out of his tackle box today, so without wasting any more time, you are listening to Papa's Tackle Box, and here's Papa.
Hey, thanks for joining me again today on Papa's Tackle Box. Today's episode or podcast might sound political, but I don't want it to be that way, so please don't think it that way. But boy, in this stay-at-home order and trying to get things back to normal, I certainly have watched a lot of news and seeing a lot of things. So today I want to just kind of talk a little about what I'm noticing, and as we head into the elections for coming up, 2020 elections, what are we headed toward, and what are things looking like? And is this a taste of maybe what somewhere in the future is going to look like when the Antichrist even takes control? So let me start by saying crises are catalysts to an organized progression of change. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, a German philosopher of the 1800s, theorized that by saying, by planning and actually providing crises, leaders can gain enormous power by stepping in and promising solutions. Using crisis and other manipulations, our leaders have now discovered ways to bypass the checks and balances that were put in place by our forefathers. Now, that's my personal opinion. The crisis we are in right now is seemingly growing into a dependence on the government to take responsibility for its citizens' well-being. Thus, as we depend more on the government, that dependence then turns into greater government control and a consolidation of power into the hands of a few. So as I've watched the news like you, and I've seen things, and I want to just shout out, that ain't right. You've messed with our rights. Desperate people will sometimes do desperate things when there's scarcity of money, when there's jobs that you've lost, and then food gets scarce, will often lead people to accept extreme measures in order to survive. In terms of despair, people often move to accept a strong centralized government to provide for them. This is where one person or a limited group of people take responsibility, and then the people become subjected to them. The founders of the United States purposed that the colonies would be under a federated system of decentralized government in which each state holds home rule sovereignty under the limits of the Constitution, where everything is regulated by laws rather than restrictive control. Now, let me just throw in there personally, I do think that we're seeing a lot of restrictive control going on, and I think that's why there's so much stuff going on right now. It's not just the virus, it's all this restrictive control. In the first book of the Bible, we find an early record of crisis and consolidation. And the story begins with the birth of a boy named Joseph. He was second to last of 12 brothers born to Jacob. As a young boy, Joseph had dreams about the future in which his father and brother would bow down to him. And their combination of these dreams and being the favorite son cited the hatred of Joseph's brothers. His brothers wanted to kill him, but they decided against it. Instead, sold him into some slave or sold him to some slave traders. He was taken to Egypt at 17 years old. He rose by his integrity to become the administrator of Potiphar's household affairs. He refused advances from Potiphar's wife, falsely accused of attempted rape, ended up in prison. Again, in his integrity and his industry caught the attention of prison officials, and he rose to become a trustee. He was acquainted to two men who had been imprisoned by Pharaoh himself, and these men had a dream, and Joseph interpreted their dreams. 2 years later, Pharaoh had a dream that he could not understand, and Joseph was summoned to call to the palace, and he explained the meaning of the dream. Pharaoh assigned Joseph to implement the plan that would help them through this dream that he had seen. He was given authority over everything in Egypt except the throne and the pagan priest. His crisis management plan was to centralize the government around Pharaoh. He assessed the production potential and set up a system. The famine finally came. Despite the widespread shortage in crop production, the people of Egypt had bread. Joseph sold them grain. He was the administrator of government in crisis. Here's how Joseph dealt with the worldwide food shortage when the famine was at its height. The Egyptians were willing to submit at all cost and on any terms. And here's what this consolidation looks like. First of all, there was this consolidation of livelihood. What happened after a while, because they had no way of making any money, all the money they had finally ran out. There was none left. And so they'd spent all they had just to have grain to make bread or have food. And everyone was reduced to the same level. And the economy is now under the control of the throne because they've run out of money and there's no way for them to buy grain. So the second thing we discover is this consolidation of livestock. When money failed, when the money was gone, they exchanged their horses, their flocks of sheep, their cattle, their donkeys for bread. Now they become poor and more dependent on the government. The third thing that I see that Joseph did was the consolidation of land. Money now is gone. That was the first thing that was all gone. They have no way of making a living. Their money is gone. They've now got rid of all of their livestock. It's gone. So what do they have to exchange for bread? They exchanged their land that was there. They gave it to Pharaoh for bread. And the fourth thing that I discovered that happened during this time was a consolidation of location. They were relocated into the cities where the food was stored. And so what this did away with transportation. They just moved everybody in so that they were in the location so they could go to where the food was. And then the fifth thing that we discovered that came out of this was the consolidation of labor. The famine was over with now, and Joseph put people back to work, planting seed, working for the government. Under their direction, because now the government owned all of their land, and so the government or Pharaoh had control over everything because they had given it away for food. The evidence that Joseph's takeover of Egypt was not done to provide long-term benefits for the Egyptians, but rather I believe it was to advance God's plan for Israel. The consolidation of power is certain to be disastrous for the people of any nation. In almost every situation where consolidation is employed to deal with crisis, the results is immediate gain and long-term loss. The book of Exodus begins was, there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. The people of Egypt, or the people of Israel now, have been subjected to slavery in Egypt by the new Pharaoh that's come in. Joseph's policies may have solved a short term problem, but the end is not encouraging. When crisis comes, people are prone to accept a solution that sacrifices the future for the immediate. Bailouts, buyouts, underwrites may be the quickest fixes when crisis hits us. But what will these solutions do to us in the future? We can learn from history that politicians often use an economic crisis to make their citizens more government dependent, and with the dependency comes more control. And so, as I look at what we're going through, and I do see that people are revolting against this, they're wanting to be able to go back to work, and what is an essential worker, what is a non-essential, and so it makes a lot of us feel like that what we do and our jobs that we do are non-essential. And so if we don't go back to work, they're not important jobs, so why do we do them? But the government is trying to control and take over people's lives by taking away our rights. And no government in history has had a great record in providing expanded benefits without eventually also expecting more control of its citizens. And so as I've been, sitting at home watching all this, and I see that we have individuals that are trying to dominate and dictate to us what we can and cannot do. And as I watch people sit back, and as we're all, but this is an epidemic of a virus that we're trying to control. I understand that. But it also makes me think of in the future when the church is raptured and we're gone, and then the tribulation period starts, and how easy will it be for one person to come in and take over and rule the whole world. We're seeing evidence of how we're losing our rights and benefits by what is offered by the Constitution. So today, I just wanted to vent a little bit that I'm concerned about our rights as citizens, and how far is it going to go, and how much are we going to lose in this battle because there is a crisis, and how much are they going to try to change our lives by changing our rules.
Well, hey, thanks, Papa, for sharing and giving some of your personal thoughts. It's good to hear. Sometimes people sit on a podcast or they stand on a pulpit and they're scared to give personal opinions because of whatever reason. But thank you for that and just doing that in general. I wanted to ask you though. Again, I think I only have about one question for you.
Okay.
So we can talk about it for a while if you'd like, because we have some time. In the story of Joseph, because that's who you were talking about, do you think, I guess again this is more of your personal thought, do you think God was behind all of that? Right? Was it God's plan that those things happened in Egypt the way they did?
We have to study the history part of this also, is because, first of all, there was no democracy during this time in Egypt. The king or the Pharaoh was absolute authority. And so now, when Joseph now has been here for quite some time, he does, have a dream, and the dream is from God. Still, I don't think the dream is about saving Egypt. I do think it is about preserving the lineage
Right.
that God is trying to create through, started with Abraham. And so I do believe that. Now, the consequences is that he saw the dream, and he saw the 7 years of fruitful, and he saw the 7 years of plenty, and 7 years of none. And I do think that interpreting the dream, he looked at a way of we've got to do something to keep the famine from all of us to preserve the world. So this was a famine at this time that was considered at this time the world, and so everyone had to come to Egypt because there was food. So do I think that God was in it? Yes, I do think that God was involved in this, and that at this time it was not like in Israel where God was the absolute authority. We have a Pharaoh that runs in whatever Pharaoh said. So at this point, yes, but God used the system that he was in to preserve the children of Israel.
Sure. And so, with it, Joseph seeing what he needs to do to preserve the land. I'm just trying to like make this connection. Do you think that that's what's happening now? Because there are those people on both sides. I mean, I don't watch the news as much as I'm sure you do or other people. But I mean, I do know what's going on because it's everywhere
Yes.
now.
Yes.
And there's people on both sides, left and right, that are both going too far, like
Yes.
both ways.
Yes.
So we can't just pinpoint one party or one side. But do you think that that is kind of the ultimate goal now for politics or the politicians in charge, the House, the president, whatever, to preserve the nation, or are you saying that it's gone further than that and it's becoming a problem?
Well, I do think that, again, it's going to be a little bit of political. I do think that our president is trying to preserve our nation, but I do think that as it's trickled down into the states, that I do believe that some that, well, this is the way it's being portrayed on the news, is the people that don't like Trump, our president, are trying to manipulate some things through this. But when I look at what's going on, I do think that it's both sides. And do I have an answer for it? No, absolutely I don't. I'm just going to the Bible trying to figure out what the Scripture says. And I see that sometimes we make decisions that will fix what is happening right now, but did we think them through at long term? And I think right now, because there is a crisis, that people are just trying to fix the immediate problem without worrying about the future, whatever effects are. So when I look at unemployment, what are these people going to do? Can the government keep paying? Yeah, they just make money and give it to them. But is that really solving a problem? And so we've got, when I look at all this, and I'm looking at this from my, because I'm an older feller now than not a young one anymore. I'm not as old as dirt yet, but I look at things and I think, okay, as I see what they're doing, I see leftists coming in trying to take away more of our rights and control things. They're trying to control, and I look at it as they're trying to tell me how I'm going to live my life, when I can pray, and I can only pray this way or that way. And I remember that I was the last pastor that got to pray at a high school graduation ceremony, and in the community that we live in. And one of the things is I had to present my prayer to the school board lawyer so he could critique it, and I could not use the name of God or Jesus Christ in it. And so then I decided I would not participate. And then I discovered that Abraham Lincoln prayed a prayer. And so I was able to recite that prayer word for word. And since the president said it, it was okay. And then the school board was not going to be sued. So when I look at things and I look at different things that are happening around the world, just watch the news, you'd see what I'm talking about. I do think that now people are trying to take advantage of the crisis to bring about the change they want. But I'm afraid that change is going to hurt us as individuals, not as Christians, as citizens in the United States that have been protected by the Constitution of the United States. That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, so to shift just for a minute, and then we kind of need to reel it in here. You said, I kind of actually like this. I don't know word for word. I was jotting notes as you were talking, but crisis is the catalyst to an organized progression of change. Is that
Yes.
how you said it?
Yes.
Um, I think this is very obvious, but I'd still like you to maybe touch on it for a second. And I know we've touched on it multiple times in this podcast throughout the episodes, but it seems very clear that this crisis has been the catalyst for change in churches everywhere.
Well,
And I know,
yes.
I know the whole episode was not quite about church, and it was about just us as people. Um, but I think this crisis in that way could be in the sense of church is a very good thing, right? Because of the catalyst of it causing change.
I think so. I look at it as a positive thing, not a negative thing. If I were speaking to young men that were wanting to go into ministry, especially since I am in a denomination, affiliated with a denomination with the Church of God, I would say, hey, go out and start your own church. Be affiliated with whatever denomination you are. But I would say start your own. And the reason I say that is because a lot of times when you move in and you take a pastorate of a established church that's been around for a while, there are traditions in that church. And the church has a personality, and it's not yours because you haven't been there long enough. So, what I see in this is that for every pastor that's wanted to make some changes but couldn't make those changes because people uh, refuse because this is tradition, this is the way we've done it all our lives. This is an opportunity for pastors to make changes because we've got to now.
Yeah, it's prime time right now.
Yeah. So I look at it as an opportunity that we can do some things now that we possibly were afraid to do because we weren't sure what the consequences were going to be. As I try to teach my grandchildren that with every decision we make, there's consequences, good or bad. But I'm not looking that we're making bad changes. We're making good changes, which is going to help us move forward. So maybe God sent this. We could look at it from that and say, hey, God sent this at a great time in our country
Yeah.
for us to make changes that we were just working slowly. But now we don't have that slowness because we've got to make some changes that people aren't going to like, first of all, the way we have to do things. But we can be like politicians now. We can put those changes in that need to be changed just because of that. So, I hope you've enjoyed today's podcast. And so, as I reel it in, one thing I want to keep saying to you: keep fishing, keep fishing, keep fishing.
Hey, thanks everyone for listening to Papa's Tackle Box. Make sure that you stay up to date with everything we're doing by following our Facebook page at Legacy Community Church. Go ahead and follow us on Instagram at Legacy Church FL, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Legacy Community Church. You can also keep up to date with everything we're doing at our website, legacycc.org. And if this podcast has blessed you in any way, you can also give through our website under the Give Now tab. Thanks for listening.